If the point of the movie is to critique the ways in which we overly rely on social media and the internet to seek our community and to find ideological connections with other people, however, social media can also be weaponized to spread disinformation, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and propaganda. And those things can inherently result in fractured realities amongst our neighbors. Therefore, the tool in which we look to find community has now been weaponized against us and created even more division than ever. And now your film is creating further division and people are going online to talk about it. Was that the point of the movie all along? Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily, or La Movie Mija. I'm a part-time filmmaker, full-time movie lover, and this is my review of Eddington. If you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for checking out my video. This is not my usual setup or my usual getup. I usually like to be a little bit more put together in front of camera. I like to be in my office. However, my office is in disarray because I am currently preparing to attend my first ever San Diego Comic-Con. Yes, I'm so grateful for this amazing opportunity. I was invited as a guest of Portrait of a Fangirl and Temple of Geek to be part of a panel with some amazing panelists. And I will also have the opportunity to attend some press junkets and do some interviews. So I have been intensely prepping for that. And I honestly set out to see Eddington as soon as possible so I could get a review to you as soon as possible. But I really had to sit on this review and process it because it's a really triggering subject matter. But before we get into that, I just want to say a sincere thank you to anyone who has subscribed or followed or engaged with my content because it's led to incredible opportunities like this. And yes, I do plan on posting a whole bunch of San Diego Comic-Con content, maybe even some light cosplays. So follow me at Movie Mija on TikTok and Instagram for more. But there's a lot to talk about with Eddington, so let's get into it. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a standoff between a small town sheriff and mayor sparks a powder keg as a neighbor is pitted against neighbor in Eddington, New Mexico. The film is written and directed by Ari Aster, and it stars Joaquin, Pedro, Pascal, Emma Stone, Austin Butler, Luke Grimes, and many more. So let's get the easy critiques and the easy praises out of the way first. Easy praises, the cinematography is gorgeous. I really love the setting of the desert. The idea of this being a modern Western set in the fictional town of Eddington, New Mexico is so cool, especially given the production that we see of the small town. It looks a little ghostly at times, and that was very much the feeling that we had in May of 2020 when things started to shut down. The performances are stellar. You have Emma Stone and Austin Butler in these very minor roles that remind you that they can do so much even when they are not like the central focus of the film. You have Pedro Pascal in a role that feels like it was written for him, and now that I'm thinking about it, it probably was. He's a very charismatic politician, but you're not quite sure if you can fully trust his intentions. And then you have Joaquin Phoenix, who is so hard to watch as Sheriff Joe Cross. And that's not because he's bad in this role. It's because he's so good as this like desperate and shell of a man who is just looking to be somebody's hero. He is looked over at home. He is looked over at work, in his professional, personal life. He is not a hero in anybody's story. And he so desperately wants some recognition. He wants to feel some sort of heroism at some point. And you can see how that drives him to also make some unsavory decisions. As a writer, I think Ari Aster is fantastic. I really love the ways he explores the depths of characters and the way that he builds tension, especially in films like Midsommar and Hereditary. And in Eddington in particular, there are so many Chekhov's guns that are laid out under the table. You don't know which guns are loaded or which direction they're pointing at, but you know that something is going to pop off at some point. I think Ari Aster as a writer is fantastic, and his characters feel so real. In the beginning, everybody feels a little bit flat and satirical, like these stereotypes of people that you either made fun of or you encountered online or that you were at one point in May of 2020. But as the film continues on, you get to learn more about their intentions, their fears, their hopes, and what's driving them. And they feel a lot more sincere by the time we get to the end of the film. The pacing of this film, even though the movie is 2.5 hours long, it's really well paced. Yes, it's a long one, but I don't feel like it kind of drags at any point. It's just always moving. There's always something to uncover. And there's definitely a point that there's a turning point. And I think that's where people start to either decide internally whether or not they're going to be yay or nay or somewhere in between about this movie. There's a certain point in this movie that takes a shift and you're like, okay, that's what we're doing here. Now for the easy critiques. I don't personally think that it's off limits to talk about something like COVID-19 or George Floyd. I think it's important to mention the name George Floyd if you are going to talk about Black Lives Matter. And I don't think that this film ever uses the murder of George Floyd in a way that feels disrespectful or feels like disingenuous. I personally like the specificity of having Black Lives Matter said, having George Floyd's name said, because it's so specific to the time and place that the characters are experiencing this tension. And yes, those elements are used to create the backdrop of the tension, but they aren't being made fun of. I also was concerned with how soon we were telling a COVID-19 story, but I think for the most part, the film really does capture how surreal it felt to be in that time. You know, neighbors turning on neighbors, people like making up ridiculous rules about masking and not really understanding the concept of it. And there's so many triggering moments in this movie where that puts you right back at that precipice of time where it felt like something was going to give and you just didn't understand yet how things were going to shake out. And that's very much present for these characters as well. They can feel that tension, that something is happening. They're on the precipice of some big change, but they're just not sure how things are going to play out just yet. But you have all these visuals like social distancing, lining up outside stores, masking in the stores, people coughing around you in a crowded area. All of these things that feel like details from a time that we can all very clearly remember. So my critique necessarily isn't about the inclusion of those very tragic details in our very real history. My critique of this film is, okay, so my frustration with it is that it uses the idea of a modern Western. It uses it so well, like having this tension in this small town and the idea that the internet is the actual villain of the story. The idea that the social media as a tool can become the thing that very much tears us apart as well. I think that is such an interesting space to play in. I just wanted the movie to say something that we haven't already discussed ad nauseum online. Like, we've already had these conversations. We already know that we are part of the problem. We are social media. We are the social and we are the media. And that, I think, is where the film starts to feel like maybe this needed a little bit more time and distance for it to have a perspective that felt a little bit newer and like it had something to say. Or maybe this movie isn't trying to say something, but it's more trying to capture that feeling while it feels really present and it feels really timely now, so that maybe in 10 years, this movie is going to feel a lot more necessary, because right now it doesn't feel necessary. I find it more fascinating, the idea of belonging and community and how our political ideologies have been something that we tie ourselves to so wholeheartedly because we are so desperate to find our people, whether it's online or in real life. There's a pervasive sense of powerlessness and futility across the characters in this film that feels so devastating. And that, I think that's something that I connected with the most, is just how much people wanted to do good by their communities. They just didn't have the tools to do that, or the tools that they were looking for were being found online. And those tools were being created to adhere to places that are very different from Eddington. Eddington is mostly an isolated little community out in the desert. It's not a big city. It doesn't make sense for a small town with a population of about 2,500 to use the same strategies that would be employed in a big city to respond to the same struggles. But because people are being forced inside their homes and during the COVID-19 lockdown, their only outlet to the communities is through their phones, and they're furthering their ability to connect with their immediate neighbors, and thus creating these very fractured realities, and are so isolated in those realities. And that's where the horror of Eddington comes from, this idea that you cannot see eye to eye with the people right next to you. There is so much to be said about the insidiousness of that isolation and how your own want for community can lead you to a destructive path, or lead you to a place that makes you unreachable by your neighbors. And I think for the most part, in the first 2/3 of the film, we are very much there. And like, I really appreciate how the film draws on like these really awkward scenarios for comedic effect. I think that Ari Aster is primed to dip his toes into comedy just fine, because you have people who have proven that you could do that in the horror and comedy spaces, like Osgood Perkins, like Jordan Peele. Both horror and comedy aim to disarm you in some way. In the first 2/3 of the film, you get a wide swatch of variations of people who are being isolated by their own belief systems. And the film wastes no opportunity to point out the awkward humor in how ridiculous some of that is. This isn't a spoiler because it's in the very beginning of the film, but you have your Sheriff Joe Cross, as played by Joaquin Phoenix, who is sitting alone in a car, presumably across the county line. And across the county line, they have a really strict mask mandate. And so when the other police officers approach his vehicle, they're masked up because that makes sense. They're in a vehicle together. They're in close quarters. They should be masked. But then they approach Joaquin Phoenix's car and he is not masked. And so they tell him because he's in their county, he needs to be masked, even though he's sitting sitting alone in his car. A very ridiculous scenario because that does nothing for nobody. He does not near any one person, so it makes no sense for him to be masked. But in that exact scenario, you can see the departure from common sense or caring for your neighbor, or even our lack of understanding of the concept of masking and why and how it works. That is one of many examples. And I really think that this film didn't leave any stone unturned as far as like showing us all the different ways that we have isolated, whether it's QAnon, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's masking, and like it's all of these different characters who are looking to champion some ideology or virtue so that they can be a hero for somebody else. Everybody wants to be seen, wants to be heard, wants to be a hero in someone's story. And the horrifying thing about that is the lengths that we are willing to go to co-opt a movement, to endanger our neighbors, or rely on the spread of propaganda and disinformation to find community. Silly humans. And that's one of the more compelling aspects of the film, is just how there's nobody who is faultless. Everybody is detrimentally co-opting a movement or capitalizing on opportunities to scapegoat someone else or point the finger at another community, driving them to do something that is inherently dangerous to themselves or to others. Unfortunately, I haven't seen Beau is Afraid, so I can't compare it to that. But when I'm thinking about this film in contrast to Hereditary or Midsommar, I feel like those movies are more singular in what they are examining. They're examining these feelings and this trauma, and it's a very singular, desolate type of feeling watching those films. Whereas Eddington is a whole lot more ambitious. It is casting a wide net on a whole cast of characters, a whole society within the community of Eddington. And the focus is less on a singular emotion or a singular feeling and more on society as a whole and the conflict that is inherent by everyone's desperate attempt to belong. I am so curious to see how this movie grows and matures with age, like a cheese or a wine. I feel like in 10 years time, maybe this could be something that people are looking back on like, wow, he really captured the sentiment of what it felt like to be around in May of 2020, because you and I know that feeling because we experienced it not too long ago. But, you know, people who were a lot younger who might discover this film and didn't know what it was like to be online and to experience all these different points of views and deal with things like QAnon and conspiracies and masks or no masks and just the confusion and the uneasiness that went along with the time. So to that end, maybe this movie was urgent and timely for Ari Aster to make so he could capture those feelings when they were still top of mind. But maybe, like I said at the top of my video, this film was made to point out the fact that we are still very much living in these very fractured realities. And this is exactly the kind of movie we deserve when we're talking about this specific time. I do ultimately think this movie is worthwhile to experience. I don't think you need to go run to the theaters to see it right now. Maybe give yourself some time. And on the Movie Mija meter, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. But let me know, what did you think about Eddington? How does it rank up against Ari Aster's other films? And did it happen to teach you anything new about what it was like being American in May of 2020? All right, that is all for my review. Thank you so much for watching my video. Wish me luck at Comic-Con, and I'll see you next time. Bye.